In this business, it's feast or famine. The phone either rings off the hook or you just stand over it and poke it with a stick, looking for some sign of life. Recently for Como Comic Books, it's been all feast. It's a good problem to have, but it's still a problem. In this video, I'm going over how I bought 3 separate comic collections in 7 days, and I'll do that while I'm going over the top 10 comics I picked up across these 3 collections. So let's get into this. 3 collections, 300 miles traveled, all in 7 days. All in all, I picked up about 3,800 books and spent thousands of dollars to bring them all home, but the value is definitely there for these collections, even with some of the issues that did arise. Surprisingly enough, the leads for 2 of these collections came in not only on the same day, but literally within about an hour of each other. The last lead would come a few days later, but that would take a couple days to happen just logistically. I'll fill in some of the story as we go over the top 10 issues I picked up from these collections, but let's go ahead and get to the books. For the sake of simplicity, I'm just going to go over the books in alphanumeric order. All right, leading off is Amazing Spider-Man 194. This, of course, is the first appearance of the Black Cat, Felicia Hardy. It was published back in July of 1979. It's a book that's really taken off in the last couple of years, ever since really we saw Felicia Hardy in Amazing Spider-Man 2. The rumor mill has kind of started that, we might see the Black Cat at some point, but thus far we haven't made it there. This issue's really pretty nice. It's a solid VF range copy, probably more like an 8.5, like a VF plus. So really happy to pick that one up. Right now in near mint, this thing's going for right around 650 bucks. Of course, plus or minus, kind of with the way things are, there are deals to be had out there. Still a book that's in high demand, and I never get angry when I find one. The next book we're going to talk about today is Amazing Spider-Man 252, and you may have noticed we're just kind of, like I said, going in alphanumerical order here. The cool thing about the collection that these Spider-Man books came out of, it was an original owner collection, and it was about 3,500 books in this one collection alone, and it was basically every Marvel issue you could more or less want from 1980 to 1993. There were a couple of books that weren't there. The Miller Wolverine miniseries, the owner had given that away to a family member as a present. That kind of stuff happens. But all in all, most of the best stuff was there. This 252, of course, is a book that's really gotten popular since the Venom movies, and it's kind of finally won out in the battle between itself and Secret Wars number 8. I feel like for a while, Secret Wars 8 was the book everybody wanted to have, but ASM 252's kind of edged it out in the last couple of years. Of course, it is the first black costume. It came out in May 1984, whereas some of the other first, quote-unquote, first appearances of the black costume, or early appearances of the black costume, came out well later, including Secret Wars 8, which is the origin of the black costume. This book, of course, is drawn by Ron Frenz, written by Roger Stern, and right now in the market, near mint copies are going for 185, 200 bucks, somewhere in there. It all kind of depends. This one definitely needs a press, and it'd present a little bit better. It's got a slight little spine roll, but still, the colors on this thing are beautiful, and I was definitely glad it was there. The next book out of that collection of 3,500 is the big book from that collection. This, of course, doesn't really need an introduction. It's Amazing Spider-Man 300. This is the first full appearance of Venom. It came out in May of 1988, and it's got this classic Todd McFarlane cover that everybody knows, everybody loves. McFarlane also did the interior art. The stories from Dave Michelini. Right now, raw prices for this book in high grade are hovering just below $1,000. There are so many copies out there of this issue. The thing is, the demand is there. That this is, as Alex the comic book hoarder has been talking about in recent weeks and months, this is a foundational book. This is a book people absolutely want to have and want to keep in their collection. So despite the large supply of this book, the demand continues to just gobble it up, which is why you're seeing that raw high grade price creep closer and closer to that 4-figure mark. Never sad to have one of those walk in the door. This book, I couldn't believe it when I saw the picture. I'd had this lead for a while and I just kind of put it on the back burner. Never really did anything with it, just kind of kept pushing it off and pushing it off. And finally it got to the point where it's like, okay, I need to just take care of this. So I contact the seller and they send me a couple pictures, and I'm going to go ahead and put the picture that really got my attention up here. You guys see if you can pick out what I got so excited about. Spoiler alert, I did buy the books, so if you're looking very closely at that picture, I'm sure you can see it by now. What was in the picture, of course, if you didn't catch it, is Avengers #1. That's right, I picked up an Avengers #1. Now here's the problem. It's most of an Avengers #1. As you can see, there's a glorious absence of book in this region right here. In case you don't have firsthand knowledge of an Avengers #1, there should be book here. For whatever reason, there was some sort of damage here, and the previous owner had decided to cut that off. So I don't know how bad it actually was, but you know, it is what it is. It's definitely low grade, but it's still an Avengers 1. There's somebody out there who would love to have this book, whether it's just a placeholder in their collection or if this is their grail and the most affordable, most accessible issue or copy of this issue that they're going to find. Somebody's going to love this book. So I knew that I couldn't leave it there. I was going to pick it up. In a way, it kind of worked out because I'd gone there thinking I was going to have to drop a large pile of money, and instead I only had to drop a medium-sized pile of money, so that was kind of a good deal. But it's an Avengers 1. What can you say? You know, it's a little rough. It's outside of the missing piece here. It is complete. It's readable. So yeah, happy to have it. Kind of a bummer when I saw the damage, but you know, like I said, somebody is going to be thrilled to add this to their collection. So I'm looking forward to being able to hook them up with that. And the Avengers 1 was kind of the big book out of that collection. As you saw in the picture, there was an Avengers 7. There were also a couple of pre-100 Journey into Mysteries in there, and just some random other issues. Unfortunately, the Marvel books that were in there, and the Silver Age Green Lantern you might have also seen, were some of the lowest grade books in that small collection. It was only about 30 books, but with the early Marvel books that were in the collection, it was worth, you know, checking out, and I'm happy I landed it. Due to the damage and the overall condition of the books, I was able to get them at a decent price, which is always nice. All right, number 5, we're going back to the 3,500 book collection. Like I said, pretty much every Marvel book from 1980 to 1993 was there. And amongst those, one of the hotter books right now is this guy, Daredevil number 168. This, of course, is the first appearance of Elektra. This is the first story from Frank Miller. He handles it all. He does interior art, story, cover art. This guy was published in January of 1981, and despite the fact that it's come down just a little bit recently, it's still way up from where it was a couple years ago. And near mint, this thing is pushing $600 on average. So if you're in the market to sell your Daredevil 168, it's a really good time, especially as we know we're getting Daredevil in the MCU. A lot of these characters, you know, in his circle are starting to heat back up. So if you're selling, now's a pretty good time. If you're buying, you might be careful. There's still some deals to be had out there if you're patient. But, you know, Elektra is definitely going to make her way into the MCU before too long. So this copy, I'm probably going to stick in my PC because I've actually sold every copy of Daredevil 168 I've ever had. So I don't have one right now, and I think this is going to solve that problem. The 3,500 book collection had an interesting mix. The majority of the books were direct edition, but without much rhyme or reason, there were a lot of newsstands that were kind of mixed in. It wasn't all one title. It wasn't all one time frame. They were just kind of hit or miss here and there. And lucky for me, one of the books that was a newsstand was this really great copy of G.I. Joe #1. The newsstand edition of G.I. Joe #1 is selling for upwards of $400 in raw high grade condition. So this book is right around that. It's a really nice copy. What can you say about this book? Anybody who grew up in the 80s, had G.I. Joes, played with G.I. Joes, watched G.I. Joe, played the NES game, you name it, G.I. Joe was inescapable throughout the course of the 1980s. And this comic, from Herb Trimpe on the art, Larry Hama doing the story, of course, Hama developed so many of these characters that we all know and love. This issue features the first appearance of the real American hero G.I. Joe team in comics. Remember, like, DC had the rights back in the day because there were actually G.I. Joe issues that came out in Showcase back in, I think it was the late 60s. In this issue, we meet G.I. Joe characters like Snake Eyes, Scarlet, Hawk, Rock and Roll, and then, of course, some of the bad guys from Cobra, Cobra Commander, and Baroness, and a lot of other people also make their first appearances in this June 1982 issue. The next issue we're going to talk about is also from the 3,500 book collection, and this book may be flying under the radar for you. I know it's something I'd noticed a while back when I was just scrolling through doing some pricing earlier this year to get ready for a show, but this book really surprised me. This is a book that's really jumped up in value, and if it hasn't been something you've been keeping up with, I think you might be surprised with where it's at right now. And that book is Iron Man 150. Of course, this is a classic Iron Man versus Doctor Doom story and cover, courtesy of John Romita Jr. You know, it's just one of those great black background, two characters duking it out Marvel comic books. Submariner 8 comes to mind. I also think of Fantastic Four 112 when I think of books that really compare to this one. Of course, it was released in September 1981. Like I mentioned, Romita Jr. did the cover. He also handles the interior art. The stories from David Michelinie. And the crazy thing with this book right now, in high grade, it is pushing $200. All right, and that's a big increase over where this thing was just a few years ago. So with all the hype around Doom, of course, everybody loves Iron Man now. And of course, Iron Man is a huge star following the MCU movies. This book just kind of snuck up on me. I don't know if it was just me. Was it on your radar? If so, I mean, let me know. Maybe I've just been sleeping on it. But, you know, I've had a few of these in the past, but it's been a little while. So I was definitely excited to find that in the 3,500 issue collection. Now, here's the thing. Yes, I bought 3 collections. Unfortunately, one of the collections was all mid-grade or lower bronze. It's great run filler stuff. Lots of, you know, $5 to $10 books, major titles, just good box stock. Unfortunately, due to the condition of the books, none of them were of sufficient value to make the list. So everything that's being featured in the video is actually only from 2 of the 3 collections. So if you are wondering when and where something from this 3rd collection was going to pop up, unfortunately, nothing's going to make the video. But if you come dig through my boxes at a show at some point in the near future, you'll find them there. The 8th book we're going to look at is one I mentioned before. We've got Secret Wars number 8. Of course, this is the origin of the black costume, a really desirable book. Lots of black costume and Venom fans want this book in their collection, and I think it's another one of those foundational books, you know. It's just a book that everybody wants to have in their collection. It's not incredibly expensive, but it's not inexpensive either. But it's just a really solid value add into your collection, which for that reason, the price typically stays pretty high on this thing. I mean, I can remember selling them for 50 and 75 bucks a pop. Nowadays, for a high grade copy, you're going to spend upwards of $200 for one of these things, particularly if you can find one that's got the really deep orangey, like almost blood orange cover. A lot of these things got washed out or just, didn't have the strongest ink hit, so they get kind of like a paley orange. So when you find one with a deeper color background, some collectors that are a little more discerning will pay a little more for that or chase those issues a little bit harder compared to the washed out ones. But this cover, of course, is from Mike Zack, who handled the covers to pretty much all of the Secret Wars, if I remember right. It was written by Jim Shooter. It came out all the way back in December 1984. And if you don't have a copy of this one, I'd put it on your list. I think most everybody is going to recognize the last couple of books, especially if you're X-Men fans. We're going to start off with the 9th book we're looking at. And again, this is also out of the 3,500 book collection. We've got a nice copy of New Mutants 98. This is the first appearance of Deadpool. Not that you didn't know that already. This book is one that's on every X-Men fan's list, or even if you're not a fan of the X-Men, you just like Deadpool, it's a book that's in high demand. Thankfully, there's a bazillion of them out there. I mean, they are absolutely everywhere, but even so, they still bring a decent price. When I was checking sales for this thing to kind of get a value, raw copies of this book still sell for upwards of $300 for, higher grade copies. It's down a little bit, actually. We're just kind of in that lull between movie projects. We hear that Deadpool's coming to the MCU, but it hasn't been announced. Maybe we'll hear something at D23, but who knows for sure. But right now, like a lot of the more modern keys, this one is in a bit of a dip, which could mean that it's a good buying opportunity, especially if you're patient. But I was surprised at the number of what I consider to be strong sales prices for raw copies, despite the correction we're seeing across a lot of books right now. Never a bad day when you can add another New Mutants 98 into the inventory. And the last book I pulled out of the collections that I picked up is none other than Uncanny X-Men number 266. This is the first full appearance of Gambit. Again, it's another must-have for X-Men fans, especially if you grew up like I did in the late 80s and early 90s. That 90s X-Men cartoon prominently featured Gambit. He was absolutely one of my favorite X-Men. I really wish he would have been in that old Konami side-scroller game. Instead, since he wasn't, I had to go with Nightcrawler, which, that's still okay. But Gambit has a lot of fans that came off of that 90s TV show. And despite the typical comic community argument, is this his first appearance? Is X-Men Annual 14 his first appearance? All that. The market decided a long time ago that this is Gambit's first appearance. That said, X-Men Annual 14 is finally starting to get some love. It's not selling for 25, 30, or 40 bucks anymore. It's finally getting a nice bump in value and is starting to rival the value of X-Men 266. This book right now is starting to heat back up. It's back up to around $200 on average for a high grade copy. The X-Men Annual 14 is a little bit behind that, which, that's fine. It's just nice to see that book not sell for peanuts compared to this one anymore. The selling point with this issue is the great Andy Kubert cover. The story inside's from Chris Claremont, like most modern X-Men stories. Again, it's another one of those must-have issues, especially for an X-Men fan. I was very happy to pick this copy up because I've sold a copy of this book like the last 2 or 3 shows I've done. So my stockpile of it has been depleted. so it's nice to be back in the game on Gambit. All in all, I'm really happy with the books I was able to pick up. The condition of the Avengers 1 was pretty disappointing, but the simple truth out there, like I mentioned, is there is a collector or an Avengers fan somewhere who would absolutely love to have that book. You know, finding original owner collections, like the largest of these 3 collections was, is really the highlight of doing this, of tracking down collections, selling comics. It's the thrill of the hunt, really. Don't get me wrong, I enjoy the books, but hearing the story about the books or a collection as a whole, that's quickly becoming really one of my favorite parts of this whole process. I also enjoy reassuring collectors who have decided to let go of their collections that I'm going to find new homes for their books where they're going to be enjoyed and appreciated. You'd really be surprised at the look of relief that comes across people's faces when they hear me say that. As we all know as collectors, they kind of become a part of you. It's a massive representation of yourself, whether it's the current version of you or a past version of you that spent so much time, effort, and treasure into tracking down these books. Collect responsibly, and I'll see you in the next one.